What's up, guys? Welcome to the Contractor Commute. We're gonna jump into our comments of the day. We got another comment, and I'm excited to get your take on this, Ben. So Daniel Gibbs says, one of the biggest things I feel like we're struggling with is the checklists. We had an episode a few weeks ago, months ago, maybe now, on checklists. Yeah, I've tried to show the team how to make them and follow them. I make them for them. I've explained over and over again how important it is to consistently lean on and follow and update these lists. But for some reason, when I ask, hey, did you check your list? Hey, did you check off each task as you go? Mm-hmm. The answer is rarely yes.
Wow.
That's
I feel
kind
your
of
pain.
Long question.
Daniel, I've had that with my team as well at various times where it can be very frustrating. I think just breaking down the question seems like there's an element of you expect your team to make a checklist a little bit as well. And then it's like, well, I'm going to step in and make the checklist because they didn't do that. And then there's also the element of like being consistent with, them checking things off not happening, right? It's just being like, there's just not a consistency there. So I think in diagnosing what the problem is there, two parts here. One is the ownership of the checklist do you want your team to own the checklist creation process, or is that something you want to build and have them follow? So I think it needs to be one or the other. Kinsey, you brought up before the show on the 10-80-10 principle.
Yeah.
So it's more or less you start off with the first 10% setting the expectation of, I need you to build a checklist. Here's the result. Here's the goal for it. That person goes and builds it out, and then you're reviewing it saying, good job, or here's what you can improve.
Yeah, which I think that 10-80-10 it's something we've mentioned before on a different episode, I think. But it is a great way to tee up your, whoever's going to own this, or have a part in creating your checklist. It's a good way for them to understand, hey, what's the expectation of the checklist too, of like, hey, what are you hoping to achieve from it? And what's the outline, if you will? You know what I mean? If you're able to give me a little bit more insight, then I can run with it and it's closer to right, if that makes sense. So
yeah. And the other piece of it being, is it clear in the sense of the expectations you have of what the output or basically the result of that checklist and why you need it, and I think this kind of ties in with the theme of this podcast today is about habits and building healthy habits, or really habit building in general,
and for a team specifically.
Right?
Yeah.
Specifically for your team, right? Yeah, not personal habit building necessarily, but it's there's an element of that where now you have a good checklist. Let's just say you go through the process, you have an owner, you go through the 10-80-10. You reviewed it, you set expectations for the checklist, you build it, or your team build it, there's a clear owner, and then you have a result you want. Now it's just a matter of following the checklist, which sounds like a huge part of the problem. And I think that's what we need habits.
That's good.
I think habits are just one of these things that just happen without us thinking about them. Just a definition of a habit. It's something that's routine. It just, there's not a question of how we're going to do it. It just happens a certain way, right?
Yeah. And
we use habits in the workplace, and you need them. For instance, if you have a certain process for protecting your client's property as part of a project, is that covering floors, covering driveways, whatever it needs to be, you have it like, well, this happens every time. We don't think about it even. It just happens.
Yeah.
Checklists can help build habits, but funny enough, the checklist also needs to happen. So, same thing with putting things away. Some of the most efficient, safe teams where people put things away the same place. The plate compactor goes right in this position every time. It's not a question mark of whether or not it belongs there or not. It's defined ahead of time where it belongs. Everyone has the expectation to put it there. And then when it comes to checklists, we have a specific task or group of tasks that you follow a workflow. This is, checklist item 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth.
Well, and I think one thing is it's when habits aren't a part of a team, it can be super frustrating, one for the leader, but also for the team, right? Because then it's like, feels like there's no specific process. It's hard to affect change. It's hard to like be efficient. And so then it's like, well, where'd you put the tool? Where'd you put the, I mean, if they're not clear habits, or processes set up front, speaking to the checklist side, I don't know that we need to sell anybody on checklists. We've talked about that before. We know they're valuable. We know they're important, but it can be really, really frustrating as a leader to not have those a part of your team.
Agreed. I've been there. And I think it takes a little bit of a mindset adjustment, because all you're seeing in that moment is my team's not following a process that I need them to follow in order to achieve a result. We just bypassed a few parts of the process in order of getting there. And I think that's the thing we really want to get to today is people don't like change. You and I don't like change for change's sake either.
Yeah.
And so when you're telling somebody, I want you to change something, it's one thing to have change we buy into.
Yeah.
That we're a part of.
Yeah.
Like a goal we set for ourselves, 100% we'll go along with that. But if somebody else is forcing change on us, we don't like it necessarily. And then habits are so hard to build. Yeah. I mean, we were prepping for the show, and I was just like, I wonder how often people keep New Year's resolutions.
Only 8% of New Year's resolutions last more than a month. That's pretty, and then you start it again the next year. You don't just get back on the bandwagon.
So a 92% failure rate on New Year's resolutions. Basically rinse and repeat the next year.
Yeah. Hence why habits are hard to build.
Right. And I think there's a certain level of understanding when you're dictating to your team of saying, I need you all to build a new habit, of realizing that's not just going to happen. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be having a one-off conversation with people and say, this is the way we're going to do it from now on. Forget everything we've learned in the past and just go, and this is the way it is.
Yeah, you're changing everything.
Yeah. On the positive side, habits are like fortresses, though. They're like steel fortresses. I mean, you have this element of a rock solid, it's going to happen a certain way once you get to that point, both for good and bad. There's a lot of positive habits and really bad ones. And so I think, be able to, sometimes we even have to sort of like eliminate a bad habit in our team. So
it's good. So what are a few questions, in starting, kind of diving into this topic, what are a few questions, key things maybe to break down as maybe we explore building habits in teams and, rolling out checklists to tie it back to Daniel's example, earlier?
Are we changing something with an existing workflow, or is it something that we're adding as a new thing? Sometimes adding a new thing is easier than changing something that's happened a certain way before. Like with our kids, if they've always been doing, let's say bedtime is at 9 p.m. and you want to make it 8 p.m., well, that's a change from what it is now, and that's sometimes hard. Yeah. As opposed to being like, well, we're going to start doing something new, can be a little bit easier because you can create buy-in around something sometimes. Right. So I think it's like, if we're changing the way something is, sometimes people have habits built around the old thing. Mm-hmm. So we have to recognize that. So being aware of, are we changing an existing workflow is important. Mm-hmm. Do we have a clear goal in mind for the habit or the checklist, whatever it is we're trying to build? As an example, the goal would be, we need an efficient process for getting things done, clearly defined, or we're trying to eliminate mistakes, prevent dangerous situations. That's a goal for this particular habit or checklist. We're trying to improve quality of our output, or we're trying to expand our workforce, having a better way of doing things.
Yeah, I think one thing too is, can you sell the vision and the goal to your team, right? Can you actually create buy-in? And that sounds like, honestly, what Daniel's maybe pointing out in the question that we talked about earlier is a piece of it, maybe not all of it, is maybe the team isn't actually bought into why you're asking them to change, and so can the goals be shared across your team, and is it clearly a necessary change? Have you been able to communicate that with your team? Have you been able to set up your team for, for trusting you in the change too? Yes. I think that's a big part of it. Back to the change for change's sake, right? You have to be able to believe in it before you're actually willing to see it through.
And there's an element that everyone has in the back of their mind, what's in it for me? Mm-hmm. And it sounds selfish, but at the same time, we don't like putting ourselves through pain unless we have some result from it.
True.
And so the team's going to be asking the question of, why are we doing this and why should I buy into it? Right. And so it's, if more efficiency equals more profit, which the net result is more time off, more bonuses, better benefits. If that's the net result of that, well, that's a goal to sell to the team. I mean, obviously not oversell, but nonetheless, if that's the net result, that's something to sell.
Well, and that's probably even a strategy as a leader, an owner of the company. Make sure you sit down and have that, think that through of like what could be in it for your team, right? If you're just like, oh no, it's just gonna be more profits and I get to take home more money and there's nothing in it for the team, that's a harder sell. You better just hey,
listen, guys,
buck up, get ready to sell. You better go to some sales training, and then call me and let me know what you learned.
You're gonna be working harder than you ever did before, more responsibility, and how about less money?
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, right. More
Where
profit.
Can I sign up?
No, whole lineup of that's just not happening.
Yeah.
I think there's also an element of, sometimes we go straight to money, but there's elements of letting your team know if we're following a checklist, we're not going to have injuries, or even pointing to statistics from the previous year of like we had 4 or 5 workplace injuries. And I think some things could have been prevented if we had a checklist, or we had customer complaints about something that we could have prevented. There's a lot of things there that are side effects that are not money.
Yeah, that's right.
But they're aspects of the team buying into them.
That's a good point. All right, so let's jump into habit building then. What are some key points to building habits, successfully, and obviously rolling that out in your team, tying it back to the purpose of the episode.
What if we just took a step back from just the general aspect of team habit building to personal habit building, and being like, anytime you've tried to build a new habit, or I've tried to build a new habit, or our listeners have tried to build a new habit, a lot of times the most common mistake, I think, when I like to go big, I want to just go for Ben version, whatever I'm on now, and just be like, this next, initiative is just going to be so much better than the last one. And really, to be effective, though, the most effective habit that I built in my life is journaling. About maybe I'm on 3 years now, something like that. But I decided I wanted to journal. And so instead of going for this very elaborate journal, it was just like, I need to get some entry in. And sometimes it's just 2 sentences. I can go back and be like, okay, this is what happened. And I look back at it like, man, I wish I recorded more. It's not very informative.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it was something. And what I did too is I set the goal of journaling in the morning instead of evening. And so if I missed it in the morning, I had an opportunity to catch up.
Oh, smart.
And so it was like one of those things was small. It wasn't related. I wasn't going to also work on 15 other things for myself. It was just one specific thing. So number 1 rule in habit formation is starting small. Yeah. And when we're doing that with a team, it comes down to, how do I break this down to a very understandable rollout, to being like, if it's a checklist we want to roll out and we want to build a habit of following a checklist, a very straightforward, simple checklist that we're more or less, that's the guinea pig.
Not 10.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't want to come in and you're like, hey, every business process, everything you've ever known and everything you've been trained on, it just got thrown in the trash can. And now
35 new checklists. You boys are going to be, this is how it's going to go down. One thing about that I love in this small, simple kind of like starting small is we learn about ourselves and learn about our team's aptitude for it as well. Because sometimes we say, wow, that simple checklist was a pain to roll out. Or that's like, wow, that was simple. Yeah. We can do more of that. Yeah. We learn about ourselves. How consistent are we and be able to rolling out a checklist?
Well, and you can probably refine it for your team too. Yes. It might be, some teams might adopt checklists easier than other teams too. Yes. Especially I'm thinking of like, it's, I'm thinking you can't train an old dog new tricks kind of thing. I'm not saying people are old. I'm just saying like,
what are you saying there,
people who have been who have been in the work,
yes.
For a while and have been trained in a certain way. It's going to be way harder for them to adopt new processes than it would just bringing on somebody new. And you're like, well, this is the expectation up front. You're able to set clear expectations for the new guy rather than, the guy that's been there for a while.
I had a carpenter on my team and he was mid-50s and things were the way they were and had been for a long time. And so when I tried implementing, here I am,
young Ben.
Yeah, young, 41. And trying, this is probably 5 years ago, but telling him this is what I wanted done and him just being like, well, why? Like, we always did this without technology. Right. It worked fine. We had a block of wood that we wrote our things on the back of. We don't need that app. So this kind of leads us into the next part of habit formation or team habit formation is selling it.
Yeah.
Kinsey, you're a phenomenal salesperson. How do we sell a habit?
Well, you have to be committed to it before your team will buy in.
Yes.
Right. So you have to believe in the thing before you can sell the thing. Right. So it's not just when you want to roll out new processes, new checklists, you need to make sure that you are willing to go the extra mile and go the effort to actually follow through and make them important for your team. They're important to you, then they can be important for your team, essentially. And then I think teamwork is required for it, right? Anytime you're selling to a customer, you want to be like, hey, this is a partnership, right? With a customer. We're going to work together on this project to build your dream project or build your dream bathroom or drywall, whatever it is, right? And so I think the same thing in teamwork is, hey, how is teamwork required to, sorry, that threw me off. It was so I was like, I'm like, what's happening? I thought you disturbed
that was this, it was a D&D.
I was like, what's happening? And then I think part of your checklist is, might be meaningful to
Ben's phone went off. Yeah. Do we even cut this part out?
No, the first part was great, and then I just lost it. It's just part of the bloopers reel.
Yeah.
Okay, I needed to read the last point before I could speak to it. And I think part of your checklist might be meaningful to somebody on your team, and part of it might not be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, adding clarity around some of those things, and being able to sell why it's meaningful to.
Have you ever been pitched a half-baked idea where somebody's like, "Hey, we're going to do this new thing at work," and you're thinking, "What are we even doing?"
Yeah, I guess my gut response is, we'll see if that actually happens, right? Like, I'm not going to do work on it.
Exactly.
And
how committed
more effort?
Yeah.
Right.
How committed is the leadership to this specific thing?
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking the correct approach to that would be to make sure that you have the idea mostly flushed out, like maybe 80% there, in the sense of, this is the goal, this is what we're trying to achieve, this is why we're doing it, and selling it, but leaving a little bit of undefined. And so when it comes down to reeling the team in, they can be like, well, what about? And you can say, okay, that actually does jive with what we're trying to achieve. Like, you're not wanting to sell 100% rigid idea, because then it's tough to buy in from either side. An undefined thing is tough to buy into, or an overdefined thing.
I think that's a good call out too, because for idea people who like want to have new processes and things like that, it can be really tempting to just throw out. I'm not thinking of anyone. I'm not thinking of anyone. It can be tempting to throw out ideas. And I know a lot of times when we work together on projects or whatever, I'm like, okay, is this something we're doing or something we're talking about? Which helps me.
You're not looking at me at all. Yeah.
But I think it's helpful to have that rapport, like have that ability to work with people on that level, and just make sure there's clarity around that, is what I'm saying. Like, hey, are we talking ideas?
Are we doing this, or are we talking about potentially doing it?
I think it's important to set that up front. So then, because then there's not sideways energy of like, okay, I went and worked on something that was not a good idea in the first place. I'm just throwing out ideas.
I think in our relationship working together, it seems as though sometimes I'm a very decisive person, and usually I don't necessarily implement a bunch of, like, I usually don't throw ideas out there unless I'm pretty ready to commit on them. So it throws you off when I throw something out there where I really just want your feedback on it, and it's really like 10% there, and I'm more or less introducing you to a thing early.
That's great.
So you're thinking, well, this is 90% ready, so what, are we doing that tomorrow?
Right.
And so you want to get on board with something, and I'm like, no, I just wanted your thoughts on it. So that's a good call out to like conveying, is it an expectation of my phone's blowing up?
You've got somebody at your front door.
Yeah. So much for do not disturb.
Yeah.
But is that something that's actually really clearly defined, making sure that that's actually part of the conversation?
Yeah, that's good.
And making that kind of a smaller group of people, if you're just trying to get feedback around something.
Good point.
That it's not the entire team. You don't want a big, like, House of Commons in England, kind of everyone just sort of talking over each other. And, it's not you need a lead. Yeah. But you need sometimes information. Yeah. Sometimes you want feedback.
That's good.
This leads us into like the third point of habit building, and of team habit building specifically, is having clear ownership. In order to hold somebody accountable for either a great job or a bad job, you need one person to hold accountable. Yeah. Not like, we all did terrible last month. There's an old expression which I've used before on the podcast, but if two people feed the horse dies. And the idea is, did you feed the horse? I thought you did it, and it's like, shared responsibility doesn't work. You can have multiple people involved with doing a thing, but having one clear owner is essential.
Yeah. And I think with the owner too, you want to make sure it's the right person, right? You don't want to, give ownership of the checklist to the new guy who has no respect on the job.
Yes.
Right. You want to give ownership to the leader, right? Like the person who could be the team lead, on the specific project. And so I think that's something to just note about, if you've implemented checklists, maybe you've implemented them to the wrong person, or you need to reevaluate some of that.
The fourth point of building habits is routine involved in making sure that in order for something to actually be consistent, I found that the habits that I'm most likely to keep is when they're centered around, okay, I'm going to do this specific thing at a specific time. If I don't wake up at a specific time, it throws the whole morning routine off. So some of the disciplines like working out or, reading or whatever it is aren't going to happen because I'm now behind on everything. And I think there's an element of helping our team with that, because sometimes, oh, boss, I didn't do that. I'm sorry. It got late at the job. Instead of being like, at 4 p.m. every day, you're going to complete this checklist. it can really help with that. Set an alarm on the phone, set a reminder, and that way it's a lot easier to get something done because it's routine around time.
Yeah, you have to make space for it.
Yeah. Can you think of situations where you have routine or habits you've built, and how do you make sure that they happen?
I mean, I've hawked my calendar for, on almost every episode that I've been on.
It is a thing of beauty, folks.
It is. It just because it helps me prioritize the things that should be priority, and otherwise, so that way it helps me vet what are the things that I should be focusing on, valuing long-term goals and how do I work that into my day, things like that. And so I think, blocking off time for the things that are important is important in your personal life, but it's also important in business. And so it's like any routine that you actually, or habit that you want to form for you or for your team, you have to make space to be able to do it. And so, similar to what you're saying of like morning routine, I'm like, okay, I wake up at a specific time every day. I don't change the time I wake up,
right.
Because then my routine would be off,
right.
to your point. And same thing with, I'm just thinking like family or whatever. I'm like, I block off family time. Like it's clearly family time whenever I'm done with work or things like that. So I don't know if that's specific to what you're
I love it.
going towards.
It's good.
But
yeah.
I think that's how I'm building routines, and I do think about that for like my kids, like the bedtime scenario you were talking about of like, hey, this routine at bedtime helps our nighttime go smoother. It helps them sleep better through the night. It helps them, you know what I mean? So not that anybody listening to this is kids or I'm a kid or whatever, but I mean, we all have a little bit of kids. But it helps my kids. Boundaries help. Routine helps. And so I think it's an important thing to call out.
There's an element of setting an example for our teams and being disciplined as well. It's very hard to expect our teams to be disciplined when we don't demonstrate that ourselves. And I think people are going to pick up on that as well. I've been a part of a couple of entities where there was this new radical shift and we're going to do this new thing. And to your point earlier, let's see if they actually do it.
Right. You're questioning it.
Yeah. But if you're used to being like, we did a new thing and we're going to stick with it and this is the benefit from it, that's clear leadership. That's a vision worth following.
Yeah.
And that involves you being a model of consistency and sticking with it. And I think that's an element of being like, can I ask something from my team that I'm not willing to do myself? Yeah. And you shouldn't.
That's good. Our fifth point is accountability. So how can we, equip and encourage our teams, with accountability and building habits?
We need visibility in order to have accountability. You need to be able to know what's going on. And I think out of sight, out of mind, if it's not a thing that's discussed, it's not going to happen. There's an element of like once you get to a certain point, like hit the wall, like when you're, say a part of a workout program or something like that, and you have, 2 weeks into it, it's like, it's almost like the runner's kind of like wall you hit, and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And then once you get past that, you're like, this is the easiest thing I ever did.
Yeah.
So like I think everyone's very quick to give up and be like, we tried, it didn't work. How many times have we heard that? I tried, it didn't work. And like, how did you try?
Right.
Did you actually push past the wall, and did you get past that? And then on the other side of that is actually a habit that your whole team's following, and it works like clockwork.
Right. Yeah. Anything worth having in life requires hard work and perseverance and consistency.
Yeah. So the accountability requires the visibility of making sure that it's our eyes are on it. It's a goal. We're going to achieve it. This is important to us. And if it's not important, we shouldn't be doing it. The consistent check-in is another aspect of more or less setting a time. If it can be just once a week, how we doing? Hand in the checklist. People know it's coming. We're back to the kid examples. My 4 boys, we have checklists at our home. In fact, we have this skylight, sky frame. What is it? Skylight?
I can't remember what it's
skylight
called.
frame, I think is what it's called. Phenomenal. Buy one. Anyway, we're not affiliates.
No.
But it's essentially this like picture frame that has a computer built into it where you just have a checklist. And my kids just punch the checklist away and it gets stuff done. It's really fun. But there's an element of even something that fun and that simple, if I'm not saying, hey, how do we do today? Out of sight, out of mind, no accountability, and say, well, it's not important to dad, so why should it be important to us?
Or eventually they stop doing it.
Yeah, the first month was just dynamite. Like the first, I don't know, few weeks in, it was still fun. And then it's past that of being like, does anybody notice? I want to go play a game.
Right. And I think, too, patience and praise is another element to it. It requires patience and persistence. Really. I think those kind of go hand in hand. You have to be patient, but you also have to be persistent. And then praise, affirmation is way more impactful than correction. And so affirming your team, when they're doing the right thing and when they're following through with things, you know, even when you don't have to ask them is, I think, how you implement that as well.
Sam had mentioned before the show that somebody had asked how old I am. So for the second time today, in my 41 years of life, I remember my mom saying when I was probably about, I don't know, late teens, early 20s, and she said something like, Ben always puts away his stuff. Like, he's so neat and just like, you know, he puts away his stuff. And I didn't even think of myself as a neat person before that point. But after that, I never wanted to disappoint her. And I'm like, I'm staying at her house. I'm going to put all my stuff away. If I'm, you know, it was almost like an identity thing was created in that moment of being like, she was calling me to say to something that I didn't even believe myself.
That's good.
To your point of affirmation, when you can call your team to that, like, amazing job with the checklist. Tim always gets his checklist in every week.
Yeah.
Phenomenal job. Yeah. You're saying way more than, listen, half you guys didn't get your checklist in. We have to do that. I mean.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, you're calling out Tim, so it feels special to Tim in your example. And then your team's seeing that too. And they're like, I want to get praised publicly. Or I want to, you know what I mean? Like, okay, now I know that that's valued and worth my time, you know, kind of thing. Okay, so let's break it down practically, right? We talked through, you know, kind of five steps, if you will.
Yeah.
We joke
There's
about
probably another 10. We don't know what we're doing.
We joke about having like steps and things like that on things like this because there's way more that goes into everything than just like 5 simple steps to building habits on your team.
3 steps, you too can be amazing.
No,
it's
not that simple.
You know what? The interesting thing about that, Kinsey, is even more important than the steps is the consistency. A lot of times just taking one action step in the right direction is way more important, whether there's 5 or 10 steps. I mean, even half-baked is, you know, as far as like a thoroughly defined, all the scenarios, all the situations of just taking one step in the right direction, one foot in front of the other, don't be discouraged. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not a motivational speaker, but I'm trying.
We'll do our best. All right, so break it down for us, practically speaking.
Okay.
I mean, real use case, hey, we have a project setup checklist.
Okay.
How am I going to roll that out to my team?
So, starting small is let's not make the checklist more than it needs to be. So it's project setup. What we're trying to define is, okay, what is the goal? So say it's protecting our client's property. Are we making sure that the driveway is covered, that we're not damaging corners? If we're in their home, are we protecting their furniture, so on and so forth? We're organizing the site, lockbox, whatever it is the routine needs to look like. When we have the checklist, making sure we have, alarm, access code, maybe there's site work involved, silt fence, whatever those action steps are. The checklist is being like every time, depending on your industry, these are the things we'll do consistently. So let's not make it more than that. It's about, this is a specific site setup checklist. And so keep it simple, keep it straightforward, complicate it later after you actually can see if it rolls out well. Then I think there's an element of what's in it for your team, making sure that they understand here's the benefit, here's the side effect if we go with this. And sometimes that's hard to do. As an example, this checklist though would be, last year, our site setup cost us in this way. We had damaged personal property that we had to repair, or things like that. And if we did this would be the net result of it. So this element, we're selling this.
Yeah, it's vision casting.
Yeah, selling the vision. Yep. And so then there's the ownership piece. Who's owning the checklist? Who's making sure it gets done every time? Is that the foreman of the project? Yeah. Is it, and then how are you actually making sure that it's done? Where's the accountability piece? And, complete the checklist, turn it into the office manager, text it to me. You're making sure that it happens. Routine. How would we make this routine? Probably just blocking work on the project until you actually have this checklist done. Like every single time, I want this checklist done before any other work proceeds. Yeah. So now it becomes a part of the routine. And then the accountability piece is you're not assuming anything related to the checklist. It's, you're baking in accountability earlier with the ownership. Right. But at the same time, you're following up with it, and it's important to you. It's important to your team.
Yeah, it's Steve's responsibility to ensure that it gets done, Or, Steve the foreman, whatever.
Right. And then the way you give feedback too is being able to say, like, I like the way this worked out. I think this could be improved here, and giving them opportunity to share their perspective. Like, man, this checklist went too far or didn't go far enough. Like, give an opportunity for them to share their thoughts too.
And ideas. That's good.
Yeah. Habits are powerful. Yeah. They are such a useful tool, but they take a lot of patience and perseverance to build. And they require us selling it to a team, because in order for us to have to go through something painful,
Yeah.
it's got to be worth it. And so vision casting to your team, making sure the goals are clear at the beginning, making sure that they have something to benefit from it.
Mm.
It's not always money, improved quality of life. And I think what's in it for you as a leader as well. I mean, this is how you level up as a company. This is how you achieve your results. And I think that can be the byproduct of, that time that you need. Why are you in business in the first place? Not to work around the clock. And so that's habits, having personal habits, having team habits really help make that happen.
Right. And be patient and consistent. I think that's one of the things we hit on multiple
we can walk away with.
Yeah.
That would be
multiple times today, right? Like being consistent, patient. That's routine. That's what we talked about. Your team's gonna have a hard time following you if you're inconsistent as a leader.
Yep. So good. Well, technical glitches and all, here we are.
Let us know what you guys think, what questions you guys have. Like, subscribe, share it.
Thanks.
See ya. It's happened 15 times. And it sounds like a blowhorn in the studio. But maybe our listeners can't hear it.
Okay. I don't think anybody, anyway, this phone is just going nuts over here.